I have about 30 years on this now. My next position was Vice President of Sales Operations. That's the position I hold today.
Start with your role as Regional Vice President of the Northeast region. What were just generally, your duties and responsibilities?
I managed the Northeast region, so headed up a field team responsible for working with the dealers in the Northeast region.
Decisions related to whether...
Approval, disapproval, requirements, relocations, things like that, within the applicable laws, for buy-sells.
What were your responsibilities with regard to sales?
To ensure that we had adequate supply of vehicles, that we supported the vehicles correctly.
When you say supported the vehicles correctly, what do you mean?
There's some regional latitude on how programs are structured, what offers are made depending on the geography. All-wheel drive versus front-wheel drive, or convertible versus station wagon, or et cetera, to make sure that we achieved the sales we tried to achieve.
To make sure what?
We achieved the sales we tried to achieve.
In your role as Regional Vice President, did you have a sales goal for your area?
Yes.
Where did that come from?
Typically set by us on a national basis and then divided up into regions.
As a regional manager, did you have input on what that goal would be?
Not really.
It was just given to you?
More or less.
Who would communicate that to you? And by who, I just mean what position?
Yeah, well, typically came from the Center from Sweden.
Currently, do you have any responsibility for measuring or determining dealer satisfaction with Volvo?
No.
Have you ever had a job in that area?
Not really.
What do you mean, not really?
Well, dealer satisfaction isn't really measured by us. It's typically an NADA function.
Do you have any responsibility related to the allocation policy? And by that I mean which cars and what mix go to dealers?
Yes.
Prior to this decentralization, you had to approve more about what was going on at the regional level?
Approved is probably not the right word. I was involved in more.
What role do you have with regard to formulating sales objectives?
It's done with my team. Sales objectives are determined by my team.
What is your role in that team?
I'm in charge of the team. They report to me.
What information do you give that team to come up with the sales objectives?
We use a third-party company. We use Urban Science that helps us determine the formulas. And then the determination is made every year on a split between historical sales and potential sales.
When did VCC come to be owned by Geely?
2010, to the best of my recollection.
How many dealers are there for Volvo in the United States?
I would have to guess, but it's about 297. Somewhere just under 300.
Are you aware of whether Volvo offers programs other than national programs?
We do.
What are those?
Regional programs.
Who comes up with the regional programs?
Each region is responsible for their own, within their given budgets.
Do you have any input on the regional programs?
Not by definition. It's not uncommon for me to have a discussion, but I don't have a responsibility for input.
How is it that you become aware of the regional programs?
My team does all of the costing of the programs. They determine whether or not it fits within the budget.
In order to have a regional program, it sounds like the region needs approval from someone on your team.
They need finance approval. They don't need approval for the program.
Does each region have a specific budget for
Yes.
regional programs?
Yes.
Is that number the same for each region?
No.
How is that budget determined?
It's determined by objectives and by the number of cars that have to be sold, how big the region is. The regions are not all the same size, so therefore they don't have the same budget. But on a per car basis, it's probably very close.
What is the purpose of the national programs?
Really simplification. It's a continent. The U.S. is a big place, and it is very diverse. What happens in Hawaii is not what happens in New York City, as you know. So, but there's a core base of programs that we believe we need. So the nationals program is a core, and then the regionalization allows us to tailor the programs to fit different geographic areas.
The idea or the reason for the national programs then is to lower the cost of the car to the consumer?
It's to help sell the car with a compelling offer.
Who do you define as the consumer?
The end user of the vehicle, ultimately.
We've used the term dealer support monies and other related terms. What does that mean to you?
Objection.
I don't.
Broad, vague, and I think you talked about incentives, not dealer support.
Well, you've used the term support in your testimony in referring to monies that get to the dealers through these programs. You recall that?
Objection.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
You don't know?
Are you talking about the incentive programs?
I'm just talking about support monies. What does that mean to you?
It doesn't mean anything to me.
I object. He specifically, you used the term before support, and he corrected you.
Other than these national programs and these regional programs, do you have any other role in providing dealers with incentive monies?
That is the role.
And just so we're clear, what are incentive monies?
Incentive monies are monies that are tied to the sale of a vehicle to help aid with the sale of that vehicle.
What are the components of the margin structure?
Objection assumes a fact that may or may not be true.
And I have no responsibility for the margin structure,
Do you know what the margin structure is?
vaguely.
What is your understanding?
The margin structure is the difference between MSRP and dealer invoice, as well as some monies that are available, what we call below the line.
What does that mean, monies below the line?
There are some variable monies that are available for certain things to a retailer within the margin structure.
Do you know what those things are?
No.
Have you ever had an understanding of what those
Yes.
things are? When did you have that understanding?
I have a general understanding now, but it's not my area of responsibility, so I don't pay that much attention.
Earlier you mentioned NADA in relationship to dealer satisfaction.
Yes.
What is NADA?
North American Dealer Association.
Do you have an understanding of what that entity is?
Yeah, it's a group that most retailers of all brands belong to, and it supports their efforts. They do an annual survey on, it's called Dealer Attitude Survey, and that's what we use to measure our dealer satisfaction with us.
Do you review the dealer attitude survey?
Yes.
Do you do anything else with that survey?
We typically look at areas that we can improve upon.
In your role now, do you do anything with the dealer attitude survey?
Not specifically.
In your role now, what do you do in relation to the distribution of automobiles?
My team is responsible for the distribution of automobiles.
How so?
We are responsible for ordering the vehicles from the factories. We're responsible for distribution to the regions, down to the dealer level.
How do you figure out how many to order from the factory?
We order based on forecasts. Every month we do a new forecast based on the results from the month just concluded and based on what we think we can potentially sell, trying to maintain sufficient inventory to reach those levels.
How do you get the sales data that you use to make that forecast?
We collect it from the retailers.
We collected
From the retailers.
Is there a specific form that you collect it from?
No.
Once you order the vehicles, what role do you have in getting the vehicles to the dealerships?
Today, none.
Would you ever get complaints from dealers with regard to the amount of time it would take for the vehicle to get from a port to the dealership?
Occasionally.
Do you recall any specific dealers?
No.
Do you recall the nature of the complaint?
No.
Do you recall how you resolved those complaints?
No.
Were those complaints resolved?
Don't know.
Do you still order the automobiles from the factory?
Yes.
How do you determine which vehicles to order?
Based on sales forecasts.
Is that sales forecast monthly,
Yes.
based on the vehicles that were sold the month prior?
As well as what we anticipate we will sell.
In ordering the vehicles, do you get any input from the regional level?
Yes.
What input?
We get input as to what variants they might like to see, how they feel the trends are moving in their particular regions.
That input comes from the regional vice president?
Yeah.
Do you make contact with dealers in determining which vehicles to order?
You mean him personally?
You or someone that works for you?
No.
Are you aware of a way the dealers have input on which vehicles you order?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Do you think, as you sit here, that the dealers have input on the vehicles that you order?
Again, I'm not sure I understand the question.
When does a vehicle get allocated to the dealer?
As soon as the order is confirmed.
Why is it that the dealer cannot change the model of the vehicle that it's allocated?
Because it's a production slot. It's slotted to be built at a particular factory.
Is it fair to say then that once a dealer's been allocated certain models, they're going to get those models?
If they want them.
What if they don't want them?
Then they don't have to take them.
How would the dealer communicate that it didn't want a particular model?
Most common practice is for them to notify their market manager.
And what is the market manager supposed to do?
Would go back and do something with the vehicle, most likely.
What do you mean by that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. They would either remove the vehicle from the allocation, they would try to ask the dealer if they wanted to, they would make some decision based on the representation that the dealer did not want the car. They might reallocate it to another dealer. They have, to be clear too, each region has their own network manager, their own distribution manager. So they have people within the regions that are responsible for moving cars around, outside of my group.
Would there be any penalty for the dealer for not accepting certain models?
Absolutely not.
So if a dealer, for example, wanted to have just XC90s, that's not a problem?
It's a problem in that our retailer agreement says that they have to have a representative sample of everything that we make. So a dealer couldn't decide, I'm going to be an XC90 dealer and I don't want anything else. But he certainly could say, I don't need any more of this sedan, but I would like some more of the other car.
Does Volvo have a written policy about this process we've been talking about, a dealer's rejection of certain vehicles?
Not that I'm aware of.
How do you determine the specifications?
We monitor take rates, we monitor inventories, what's in supply, what's not in supply. So for instance, I would order front-wheel drive cars for Miami, but all-wheel drives for Boston.
Why?
In Miami, there's no need for an all-wheel drive car, and consumers tend to prefer to buy a front-wheel drive car. In Boston, because of the weather, consumers prefer all-wheel drive vehicles. So it's about putting the right cars in the right places.
What types of cars would you need or the specifications in Hawaii?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I mean, I don't know every market that intimately.
Are there any benefits other than making a sale to selling the Volvos to the rental car companies?
Yes,
What benefits?
there's exposure of the product. It also allows us to manage inventory levels that ebb and flow. Primarily, it's done, though, for the exposure purpose. People on vacation rent a car. If they rent a Volvo, hopefully they say this is a great vehicle. When it's time for them to buy a car, then they come visit a Volvo retailer and purchase one.
You also said you had used cars.
Correct.
What's that about?
Well, it's about used cars.
Are you familiar with the term courtesy car?
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
It's a vehicle that's put into service to be used by customers, typically when they're in service or having their vehicles serviced, and they want another vehicle to drive.
Is another word for it service loaner?
Yes.
Do you have anything to do with service loaners in
Yes.
your role? What do you have to do with it?
We support them with the service loaner allowance.
What is that?
It varies from time to time, but currently it's $1,000 for 6 months worth of use.
Who gets the $1,000?
The dealer.
What does the dealer have to do to get that thing?
Use the vehicle as a service loaner.
What happens to the vehicle after the 6-month period?
It gets retailed to an end user. Hopefully.
Let's say a dealer wants to put a service loaner, get a service loaner. What does the dealer need to do?
The dealer needs to make sure that there's an available spot for it to become a service loaner, and then simply report the car in the system as a service loaner.
What do you mean by an available spot?
Well, we don't, the amount of service loaners is not unlimited. So there's an allocation of service loaner volume to each of the regions, and then the region has to manage it and stay within that volume, because the funds are not unlimited.
When would the dealer actually get the monies in this process?
Immediately. Well, at the end of, on the financial statement,
Is that also known as,
on the part statement, yeah.
you mentioned that the region has an allocation of service loaners.
Correct.
Does the allocation go down to the dealer level?
No.
So it sounds like the only limitation on a dealer creating service loaners is the approval of the region. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
When a dealer makes a vehicle a service loaner, does that vehicle have an owner?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Are you familiar with a retailer delivery report?
Yes.
What is that?
An RDR, that's when the car is reported sold to someone.
Is it true that when a dealer creates a service loaner, it has effectively purchased the car for itself?
No.
When does Volvo recognize that it has wholesaled a car to a dealer?
When we invoice the retailer.
When does that occur in the process?
That happens when the vehicle is called out for final transport to the dealer.
Once a dealer has made a vehicle a service loaner, is that vehicle new or used?
That's not a question that I can really answer.
In a state where a dealer is required to register and get a title on a vehicle that's a service loaner, once that occurs, is that vehicle a new or used vehicle?
That would be a question you'd have to ask the state.
When a dealer puts a vehicle in as a service loaner, does the factory warranty start running on that vehicle?
Yes, it has to. You can't drive a vehicle without a warranty, without exposure.
You mentioned that another type of RDR is demo. What is a demo?
Well, every retailer should have a sampling of what's available for consumers to drive.
Is there a guideline or how many of a particular model does Volvo ask the dealer to put in as a demo?
That would be up to the dealer. But we don't have a requirement for a number past that.
When you're referring to a customer coming in and driving whatever car they want to try, you're referring to a test drive?
Yes.
Is it Volvo's preference that a test drive be done in a demo as opposed to a new vehicle?
Could you ask me that question a different way?
Are you aware of whether certain dealers make a practice of allowing customers to test drive new vehicles?
I'm not aware.
Is there any penalty for a dealer not creating demos for customers to test drive?
No.
Are you familiar with the term punching?
I know a term, punching. I don't know if it's the same term you know.
Are you aware of whether dealers use that term today?
Oh, sure.
What do they use that term for?
Reporting a car sold.
Is that term synonymous with creating an RDR?
I assume, yes.
A market is what?
A market is a geographic area that's covered by some representative.
Is it accurate that the issuer is responsible for typing up the actual content of the sales bulletin?
No.
Who types it up?
Typically one of my variable marketing people. Could be anybody on the team.
Is there someone who reviews what has been typed up to make sure it matches?
Yes,
Who is that person?
it's a group of people. It's then sent to a group of people for final approval.
Are you part of that group of people?
Yes.
What happens once it goes through that group of people?
Then it's released to the retailers.
What are the terms of this incentive generally?
Generally,
I would object that the documents speak for itself, but go ahead.
the terms of this program, the document does speak for itself. And in general, they're all different.
Right. So with regard to this particular program, what is being offered by Volvo?
What's the specific question? I mean, it is outlined on here. There's a retail objective. There's a pot of gold that the retailers can share in based on their performance.
What is the pot of gold?
$1,000
How does a retailer share in that pot?
by reporting vehicles, by selling vehicles and achieving their objectives.
In other words, if they create a demo or loaner that's a vehicle towards reaching their sales objective, but not towards getting this pot of gold.
Correct.
Objection to form.
What does the consumer get out of this program?
I couldn't answer that question. There is an incentive available to be passed on to the consumer. Whether the retailer chooses to do that or not that's not our decision.
The dealer would not know how much it's going to get out of this program until the program is over, correct?
They would have an idea, though, of what kind of volume they would be achieving.
The amount that each particular dealer would get would be based on how much all the other dealers sold nationally, correct?
That's correct.
Are you saying every dealer would have an idea of what that is?
They would probably have an idea where they're going to fall based on their objectives.
Why was this particular program issued?
I would have no idea.
Volvo issued this program, Exhibit 1, to increase sales.
Yes.
Do you recognize what this is?
Yes.
What is it?
Another sales bulletin.
Is this a national or regional sales bulletin?
This is a regional sales bulletin
How do you know?
because it's issued by a regional sales manager. It's also only eligible in Western region markets.
Have you ever heard of this particular program?
No. Yes. Yes, I have. Actually.
When?
Several years ago, we had a discussion about it.
What was that discussion about?
Just about the terms of the program.
Why were you having that discussion with Mr. Burrow?
Because it was a unique idea, his belief in the California market and the West Coast market, how they liked big wheels and fancy wheels.
Did you approve this program?
It was not necessary.
Who initiated that discussion?
I think it was just a general over dinner kind of, we're doing this out here now. It was just discussion.
You can approximate, but what percentage come with wheels that would qualify for this program?
I couldn't even approximate it. Yeah, I would have no way of knowing.
The second bolded portion says facility compliant override.
Yes.
What is that about?
Facility, I'm sorry.
Compliant override? What is that?
That is a system that we put in place when we were encouraging retailers to renovate their facilities to our most current standards, that allowed for those retailers to receive a 35% override on the allocation, beginning with XC90.
What would it mean for a retailer to receive a 35% override
What would mean some additional vehicles,
of a particular type?
starting with XC90.
Why was this allocation put into place?
Because it was a brand-new vehicle, and we couldn't allocate it the way we typically allocate it because there was no sales history on this variant. So we needed a fair and equitable way to allocate to all the retailers that would ensure at least initial fair distribution.
Was the XC90 a popular vehicle?
Oh, yes. It was also the first of our new cars.
Was there ever a time where a dealership's allocation of XC90s would be tied to its taking certain other models?
Never that I'm aware of.
Are you familiar with something called brand identity op standards?
No.
Are you familiar with whether dealerships have a minimum inventory requirement?
Other than what I stated earlier, that they have to have a fair representation of our product offerings, there is none that I know of.
Do you know whether a dealer needs to keep a certain number of vehicles based on projected sales?
No.
In your role, your current role, do you ever see sales projections from the various regions?
Not specifically, no.
Are you aware, or did you ever hear of an issue with Volvo's distributor license in Hawaii?
Yes.
What do you know about that?
I just know that due to the name change, there was an issue with the license.
Do you know how that issue impacted the Volvo dealer in Hawaii?
I do not.
How did you find out about the issue?
I heard it in a meeting, I believe. Couldn't swear to that.
Do you know who gave you that information?
I do not.
Did you make any inquiries after you got that information?
Did not.
Does Volvo give money to dealers related to advertising?
Yes.
What do you know about, is there a current program?
Yes.
What do you know about that program?
Very little.
Are you familiar with something called transportation assistance?
No. I'm familiar with the term, but I'm not familiar with what you're speaking about.
What does that term mean to you?
It means that there's transportation assistance.
How would that work?
I don't know. It would depend, I guess, on the particular instance.
It's accurate that in your role, you create sales goals for each region, correct?
Yes.
Do you also create sales goals for a market?
Yes.
So,
But it's bottom up. We create sales goals for every retailer and then roll it up.
that's your function. If a retailer had concerns about its sales goal, Has any retailer ever come to you with those concerns?
Yes.
How do you address that?
We explain the methodology by which it was determined and our rationale for arriving at that goal, and then have a discussion.
Is the conclusion of that discussion ever a reduction in a retailer's sales goal?
It's important that we apply a sales goal fairly and equitably to everyone. So unless the rationale is found to be flawed, in which case we would change everybody's, typically not.
Have you ever reduced a retailer's sales goal?
Not that I recall.
Does every retailer have a sales goal?
Yes.
Can a dealer meet its annual sales goal by creating demos?
Objection to form.
Yes.
Are you familiar with something called Care by Volvo?
Very much so.
What is that?
It's a subscription model that we have just launched about a year ago.
Does the dealer have a role in Care by Volvo?
Absolutely.
What's their role?
They sell the car to ultimately.
If a dealer sells a car through this Care by Volvo, does that vehicle count towards meeting their sales objective?
Yes.
Does every dealer have to participate in this Care by Volvo program?
No.
Are you familiar with something called the Retailer Advisory Board?
Yes.
What is that?
It's a group of retailers assembled from around the country, representation from each of the regions, that helps us and advises us on policies and programs and things that we're looking at. They're not a decision-making board, they're just an advisory board.
How many retailers?
It varies. Currently, it's 12.
How are those retailers selected?
Currently, an election process for the other retailers.
I see. So out of the pool of retailers, they elect representatives.
Yes. By region.
It sounds like there was a different process before.
There's been many processes over the years I've been with Volvo. Prior to that, it was selected by a regional vice president or by management of some level.
When did it change to being an election from that?
2 years ago.
Do you have a role with respect to the Retailer Advisory Board?
Other than I attend every meeting, no.
Why do you attend every meeting?
I'm part of the executive management team.
Is it accurate that everyone from the executive management team attends every meeting?
For the most part, notwithstanding schedule conflicts.
I see your name appears under the list of people present.
Yep.
You recall attending this meeting?
Nope.
Do you know what Exhibit 7 is?
Only from what it says, minutes from the RAB meeting.
Are you familiar with minutes being created from these meetings?
No.
You didn't know that they were created?
No.
You don't get copies of minutes?
Probably do.
You don't read them?
Probably not.
And towards the bottom, there's a bolded area that says sales update. Can you read the third bullet?
RAB emphasized and wanted to put on the record. RAB emphasized and wanted to put on record that punching of RDR is fundamentally bad practice.
Do you recall that topic coming up?
Vaguely.
What do you recall about it?
Just that it came up and there was a discussion about it.
What are your thoughts about this statement?
I have none really.
Do you know what is being referred to here?
Yes.
What?
They're talking about reporting cars as demos that they didn't want reported as demos.
Who is talking about that?
It says the RAB. I don't know specifically who in the group.
Why didn't they want them reported as demos?
I don't know.
Why did they want to put this statement on the record?
Don't know that either.
Do you think punching of RDRs is fundamentally bad practice?
No, sir.
Why not?
First of all, I'm not sure what you mean by punching of RDRs. RDR in cars is not a bad practice. I certainly don't think that demonstrators are a bad practice, and I certainly don't think that service loaners are a bad practice. And I certainly don't think that additional support given to a retailer is a bad practice, and that's very often what's related to that.
How so?
Just oftentimes, we'll pick a vehicle that's hard to sell, or one that's getting very close to the end of its run, and say, if you report this vehicle, we will give you some additional cash, and that will help you sell that car to an end user. So basically, it supports the retailer with additional funds to be able to relieve their inventory of the car.
Directing your attention to the top of page 1, where it says attendance. I see your name is listed.
Yes, sir.
Do you recall attending this meeting?
No, I don't.
I take it you've never reviewed these notes.
I don't remember. I don't recall doing so, no.
It says October true retail pace encouraging, and true's in quotes. Do you recall what that's about?
I think that's the fact that we were starting to pick up some steam and get more sales.
What would true refer to in that context?
I'm not sure.
Let's go further down. It's 1, 2, 3 bullets down. Can you read that?
To get off the demo drug?
Do you recall that discussion?
I do not.
Is that your understanding of what demo drug means?
Don't know. So
Does-
it's a slang term. I'm not sure what it means.
It's the first one. Objective setting must be pragmatic and realistic. Do you recall that discussion?
I do not. There's always discussions about programs. There's always, it should be this, it should be that. It's never, there's no one size fits all. So.
Are there often discussions about objectives?
I'm sorry.
Are there often discussions about objectives not being realistic?
Constantly.
In what way are they not realistic?
I couldn't tell you. You'd have to ask the specific person that was saying that.
What does a dealer need to do to take advantage of this program?
Register their vehicle as a demonstrator under the program guidelines.
Do they need to keep it as a demo for a certain period of time?
According to this, until January 9th.
Is it accurate then that it's for 6 days?
If that's what the dates work out to, this was released, it looks like on 1/3/16, so yes.
Why did Volvo create this particular program?
I could only surmise because I don't recall specifically. But typically when you see this kind of program, it's to help retailers with inventory. You can see that it's an optional program. They have the opportunity to participate or not to participate, and it allows the retailer to get another, in this case, $50 to help them sell down vehicles. So XC90 was excluded, I'm assuming, because it was fairly new and it's still a very hot model and doesn't need the extra support, whereas the life cycle cars were starting to age, and this gives them an opportunity to do so.
Do you recognize what this is?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a daily sales report that's generated by the Western region.
Do you review these?
Never. It's a regional report. I don't use regional reports.
Are the daily sales reports consistent between the regions in terms of form?
No, they are not.
Do you recall the response of dealers to that program?
No, I don't know. Yeah, I do not.
Do you have a role in making sure that there is enough Volvo money to back up a program that's offered to the dealers?
All programs have to be within the budget.
Who comes up with that budget?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Do you have a role in managing that budget?
Yes.
What is your role?
The budget belongs to my department. So
You make decisions about how to use the budget.
that is correct.
Do you recall what the Western region's budget was at that time?
I do not.